The flames roared like a beast unleashed, swallowing the apartment complex in a hellish inferno. Firefighter Jackson Reed stormed through the chaos, hauling a terrified person from the wreckage just before the building collapsed. He should have been hailed as a hero. Instead, the moment the smoke cleared, they put him in handcuffs. The charge? Arson. The city needed someone to blame, and a black firefighter in a department filled with men who never wanted him there was the perfect scapegoat. Evidence was ignored. Witnesses were silenced, the truth buried beneath layers of corruption. But Jackson wasn't going down without a fight. They thought he'd burn. They forgot. Fire makes steel stronger. Who really started the fire? The truth they tried to hide. Heroes shouldn't be framed. Lies shouldn't become truth. If you believe in justice, subscribe now and uncover the full story. The night was supposed to end like any other. Another fire fought, another life saved. But for Jackson Reed, it became the night his own life went up in flames. The alarm had blared at exactly 11:42 p.m., calling Engine 27 to a 3-story apartment complex, its upper floors already devoured by fire. Thick smoke stained the sky, glowing orange from the inferno below. Jackson, a 10-year veteran firefighter, didn't hesitate. Rushing inside with his team, he pushed past collapsing beams and walls crumbling from the heat. A mother and her child were trapped on the 3rd floor. He found them, lifted them onto his back, and fought his way through suffocating blackness, flames licking at his gear. By the time he burst through the exit, lungs burning, the building was seconds from collapsing. People cheered. The news cameras rolled. Jackson had done his job. Then, everything changed. Before the fire had even died, police arrived. Too many of them, moving with purpose. His captain wouldn't meet his eyes. His crew shifted uncomfortably. "Jackson Reed?" An officer stepped forward. "You're under arrest for arson." The words slammed into him harder than the fire ever could. Handcuffs tightened around his wrists, the same hands that had just saved lives. He turned, expecting his brothers in uniform to defend him. They said nothing, and in that silence Jackson realized he wasn't their hero. He was their scapegoat. The ride to the station was suffocating. Jackson sat in the back of the squad car, his hands still cuffed, his turnout gear still reeking of smoke. His mind raced. Why him? Who would do this? At the precinct, Detective Caleb Whitman was waiting, mid-40s, grizzled, a man who had spent years convinced that every black man in cuffs belonged there. He didn't waste time. "You think you're some hero, huh?" Whitman sneered, tossing a file onto the metal table. "Funny thing is, heroes don't start fires." Jackson's stomach twisted. "I didn't start anything," Whitman smirked, flipping the file open. "Then explain this." Inside were photos of an empty gas canister, a charred rag, and a security camera still, grainy, unclear, of a figure near the back entrance of the building minutes before the fire. "We got an eyewitness," Whitman continued. "Someone saw you sneaking around right before the flames broke out. And your fingerprints? Found on a gas can at the scene." Jackson's jaw clenched. He knew this was a setup. He had fought fires for a decade. Why would he start one? But it didn't matter what made sense. He saw it in Whitman's eyes. They had already decided he was guilty. Then came the final betrayal. The door opened, and in walked Captain Jack Delaney, Jackson's superior, a man he had trusted with his life for years. He stopped just short of looking Jackson in the eye. "Jackson," Delaney sighed, "they have evidence. It's best if you cooperate." Cooperate? Jackson's blood ran cold. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for an easy conviction, and they had chosen him. Jackson's pulse pounded in his ears. Cooperate? They wanted him to roll over, to accept the charges, to become just another statistic. Not a chance. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Detective Whitman. "You know this is a lie," Whitman scoffed. "Then prove it!" Jackson's mind sharpened. He had spent years fighting fires. He knew how they spread, what caused them, and more importantly, what didn't. If they were accusing him of arson, they needed real evidence, and he was about to expose just how weak their case was. "Where's the accelerant pattern?" Jackson shot back. "You claim I use gasoline, so where's the burn trail?" "Fire spreads differently when accelerants are used. You'd see a clear point of origin. Do you have it?" Whitman's smirk wavered. The question caught him off guard. Jackson pressed on. "What about burn residue on my gear? You searched it, didn't you? If I poured gasoline, my gloves, my suit, they'd all have traces. Did you find any?" Silence. Captain Delaney shifted uncomfortably. He knew Jackson was making sense, but he wasn't speaking up. Whitman slammed the file shut. "That's for the court to decide." Jackson's fists clenched under the table. They weren't interested in the truth. They had already decided he was guilty. They just needed to make it stick. That's when Jackson made a choice. He wasn't just going to defend himself, he was going to expose the corruption behind this entire setup. Jackson sat in his cell, staring at the cold concrete walls. They wanted him broken. They wanted him scared, but they underestimated him. He replayed the night of the fire over and over. Something wasn't right. He had been one of the first responders, pulling people from the flames, yet somehow he was the only suspect. Then it hit him. The security cameras. The building had surveillance. If the police were so sure he did it, why hadn't they used the footage? Because it didn't show what they wanted. The next morning, Jackson's lawyer, Elliot Marks, a white public defender with too many cases and too little time, arrived. He looked exhausted, flipping through the police report. "This doesn't add up," Jackson said, leaning forward. "Ask for the security footage. If they had proof, they'd be waving it in my face." Marks sighed. "Jackson, the system isn't built for you to win. You fight too hard, they'll bury you." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Then start digging." Reluctantly, Marks filed a motion for the footage. 2 days later, the prosecution claimed it was corrupted, unusable. Jackson wasn't surprised, but that meant something even bigger. Someone was hiding the truth. He needed to find out who, and fast. Jackson knew the fire wasn't an accident, and now he knew the case against him wasn't either. Someone had set him up, but who and why? His mind went to Captain Roger Whitman, the man who had always made it clear Jackson didn't belong in the department. A black man as one of the best firefighters? That didn't sit right with Whitman. He had always found ways to undermine Jackson, always threw the worst shifts his way, always questioned his decisions on the field. And now, Jackson was the only suspect? Too convenient. Jackson called Marks from jail. "Look into Whitman," he said. "I guarantee he had something to do with this." Marks hesitated. "Jackson accusing a decorated fire captain without evidence? That's career suicide for both of us." Jackson clenched his fists. "Then let's find the evidence." Marks dug deeper. Turns out, the burned building had failed safety inspections multiple times. The reports were buried under paperwork, but Jackson's gut told him someone had a reason to make that building disappear. Then, another break. A witness had seen a man in firefighting gear leaving the back alley minutes before the fire started. The police ignored the statement, but Jackson wouldn't. This wasn't just a setup, it was a cover-up, and Jackson was about to rip it wide open. Jackson wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting to expose the truth. If he didn't, the real arsonist would walk free, and the system would claim another innocent black man. Marks managed to track down the witness, a janitor named Luis Mendoza, who worked in the building next door. The night of the fire, Luis had seen a man wearing turnout gear slip into a black SUV and speed off. The police dismissed his statement, claiming he was mistaken, but Jackson knew better. Firefighters don't just leave scenes before the job is done unless they have something to hide. Marks pressed the fire department for logs of who responded that night. Strangely, Captain Whitman wasn't listed, yet multiple firefighters recalled hearing his voice on the radio. Then came the final crack in the case. Security footage. A camera across the street captured a firefighter entering the building minutes before the fire started. The footage was grainy, but the stature, the way he moved, Jackson recognized it immediately. It was Whitman. Marks took the evidence to the DA, but they hesitated. A white fire captain with a spotless record against a black man already painted as guilty? They needed more. Jackson knew what he had to do. He had to take the truth to the public. If the system wouldn't listen, he'd make sure the world did. Jackson and Marks knew the truth, but exposing it wouldn't be easy. The system wasn't built to admit its mistakes, especially when the accused was a black man, and the real criminal was a white fire captain. They needed a moment that couldn't be ignored. Jackson reached out to investigative journalist Maya Collins, a reporter known for exposing corruption. At first, she was skeptical. Another firefighter accused of arson? But when Jackson handed her the security footage, the dismissed witness statement, and the fire department's altered logs, her expression changed. "This is big," she muttered. Maya didn't waste time. The next morning, a bombshell report hit the news. Innocent firefighter framed? New evidence suggests cover-up in arson case. The city erupted. The public demanded answers. Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for Jackson. The pressure was too much. The DA, now facing backlash, had no choice but to reopen the case. In court, Jackson sat tall as Marks presented the evidence. The security footage, the fire department's falsified records, the witness statement the police ignored. Then, the final blow, Whitman's financial records. Marks revealed that Whitman had taken bribes from a shady development company. That burned building? It was set for demolition. But the arson accelerated the process, conveniently clearing the way for a high-end project. The courtroom fell silent. Whitman's face turned pale. He knew it was over. Jackson wasn't just proving his innocence, he was tearing down a system that tried to bury the truth. The courtroom was suffocating with tension as the judge prepared to deliver his ruling. Jackson's entire life hung in the balance. Judge Elliot Crawford, a man who had barely concealed his skepticism at the start, now looked deep in thought. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Falsified reports, a corrupt fire captain, a police force that ignored key evidence. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Crawford exhaled sharply and spoke. The charges against Jackson Reed are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, this court recommends a formal investigation into Captain Whitman's actions and the conduct of the police and fire departments involved in this case. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few cheers filled the space. Jackson closed his eyes, letting the moment sink in. He was free, but this wasn't over. As Jackson stepped outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him. Microphones were shoved in his face. Cameras flashed. Jackson, how do you feel? Do you plan to sue the fire department? What's your response to those who still believe you're guilty? Jackson didn't hesitate. He turned to the cameras, his voice firm. This wasn't just about me. How many others have been silenced? How many innocent black men have been framed, their lives destroyed? Today, the truth won. But we can't stop here. Justice isn't a moment, it's a fight. Across town, Captain Whitman was escorted out of the firehouse in handcuffs. His empire of lies had collapsed. But for Jackson, this was just the beginning. He wasn't just walking away a free man, he was walking away as a fighter. Jackson stood outside the courthouse, breathing in the fresh air like it was his first real breath in months. He was free, but freedom felt different now. His mother, Loretta Reed, rushed forward, pulling him into a tight embrace. Tears streaked her face, but her grip was strong. She had never doubted him. Nearby, his best friend and fellow firefighter Darius Cole patted him on the back. Man, you just took on the whole system and won. Jackson gave a small, tired smile. Winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the fire department, tension was at an all-time high. Captain Whitman's arrest had shattered the illusion of integrity. Firefighters who once stood by him now whispered behind his back. Others, the ones who had sided with Jackson, felt vindicated but uneasy. If this could happen to Jackson, it could happen to anyone. Meanwhile, the police department was under scrutiny. Detective Craig Monroe, the lead investigator on Jackson's case, had disappeared from the public eye. His name was being whispered in internal affairs meetings. The corruption Jackson exposed wasn't just one bad fire captain, it was the system itself. As for Jackson, he had a choice to make. Go back to fighting fires or start fighting something bigger? Looking at the city skyline, he already knew the answer. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Jackson's case wasn't just about one man fighting for justice. It was about every black firefighter, every black worker, every black citizen who had been accused, silenced, and cast aside without evidence. The courtroom had been his battlefield, but the real fight was out here, in the streets, in the system. How many others had been framed? How many never got the chance to fight back? Jackson knew his victory wasn't just his own, it was a call to action. The media had turned his story into a sensation. Some framed him as a hero, others still clung to their biases, insisting there had to be some guilt in him. Because to them, a black man's innocence was never absolute. But Jackson didn't care about their headlines. What mattered was the change coming. The fire department was now under review for racial discrimination. The legal system had taken a hit. People, real people, were talking, questioning, demanding better. Jackson had walked into the fire that night expecting to save lives. He never thought he'd have to save himself. Now, he was done waiting for justice. He was going to build it himself. And he wasn't alone. Jackson's story isn't just his own, it's a reflection of a system that has failed too many black men before him. How many more have been accused without evidence? How many have been silenced before they could fight back? This isn't just a story about one firefighter proving his innocence. It's a wake-up call, a call to question the institutions we trust, to challenge the biases that turn heroes into suspects, and to demand a justice system that actually serves justice. If Jackson hadn't fought back, his life would have been ruined, but not everyone gets that chance. Let this be a reminder: corruption thrives in silence. Injustice survives when no one speaks up. So don't let this story end here. Share it. Talk about it. Make sure the world hears it. And if you believe in truth over bias, Subscribe for more stories that expose the reality too many try to ignore.